Hi, everybody. Welcome to Post-Traumatic Parenting. I'm Dr. Robin Koslowitz, YouTube's post-traumatic parenting expert. Today, we're going to be talking about vicarious traumatization, when events in the news make us feel triggered and how that impacts our parenting. We're going to understand why that happens and what to do about it. If you like content like this, please subscribe below. Please also check us out on Instagram at Dr. Koslowitz Psychology, where we have a subscriber community where you can ask direct questions and interact with other post-traumatic parents who are on the same journey that you're on. So many of you have messaged me from YouTube saying that you have specific questions you'd like to ask, and Instagram is generally where we can be a little bit more responsive and have that back and forth. You can also check out the Post-Traumatic Parenting podcast, available wherever you get your podcasts. So let's talk about vicarious traumatization. First of all, we have to understand the trauma app in our brain. The trauma app is born when we experience our first trauma. And really, the trauma app is trying to do a very beneficial thing. The trauma app is all about survival. It wants us to stay alive at all costs. For the trauma app, surviving is so much more important than thriving. So the trauma app looks for a behavior we can engage in, something we can think about, something that we can make into a habit that will keep us safe. Now, here's the problem. The trauma app lives in our amygdala, which is a part of our brain that can't really tell time and that doesn't always differentiate between reality and a perceived sense of threat. So to the trauma app, feeling unsafe is the same as the reality of not being safe, right? And that's why the trauma app will sometimes want us to do things that feel very, very, very distressing, but maybe will keep us alive, right? So remember that anything in our brain that has to do with survival is inherently unpleasant, right? Think about the smell they put into natural gas so that if we have a gas line open, we smell it right away and we leave the house because we're like, ew, what's that smell, right? We might not notice natural gas filling up a room otherwise. Think about a fire alarm. Think about the dinging sound that happens when you don't put on your seatbelt. Those signals exist to keep us safe, so they're loud, they're noxious, they're intrusive, and they're there for that reason because they want us to remain alive. So now we have that trauma app that was born the moment we were traumatized. And the trauma app exists to restore safety. Remember, perceived safety. Whether what we're doing is actually safe is something very different. Whenever the trauma app is reawakened, it's like an app that sometimes goes into hibernation, it tries to grab permissions from every other part of your brain. So for example, if events in the news are triggering you, right? The trauma app sometimes doesn't let you look away. The trauma app says more information means more safety. So I need to go onto channel after channel after channel and watch horrific scene after horrific scene because then I'll be informed. And the more I know, the safer I'll be. Now, in actuality, getting ourselves adrenalized, flooding our systems with cortisol by watching horrific scenes of violence, horrific scenes of human suffering, that really doesn't make us safe. In fact, in the long run, in terms of our cardiac health, it makes us significantly unsafe, right? In terms of autoimmune diseases, which we now know come from having a sustained stress response for a very long time, right? We know that actually adrenalizing ourselves and raising our cortisol levels by watching these kinds of scenes is going to make us much more unsafe. But the trauma app thinks the more I know, the safer I'll be. Remember, trauma app also doesn't necessarily understand time, space, distance, past, present, and future, right? So something happening thousands and thousands of miles away, the trauma app wants to know about it because it doesn't understand distance, right? So will watching a bombing taking place halfway across the world make me any safer? Not really. right? But my trauma app just doesn't want to let me look away because maybe it's dangerous. Now, this is really not conducive to parenting, right? Because when we're parenting, we want to connect, right? We want to be close with our kids. We want to be in that state where our oxytocin levels are high and we're in tend and befriend mode. Being in fight or flight mode doesn't help with that. Our kids can sense when we're adrenalized. Little kids, especially infants and toddlers, can sense that their parents are feeling a lot of stress, even if we're trying as best we can to signal safety and calmness and routine. They feel our stress, our bodies, the way we're holding ourselves, the way we're speaking. They know when we're stressed out, and that's unsettling for them. So if our kids ask us, are you stressed out right now? The answer should be yes. If we're feeling stress, we should acknowledge it. I know that seems a little scary to do, but saying to a child, especially a child who's aware of something happening in the news, are you stressed out about what's happening? Yes, I am feeling stress. I've taken measures to keep us safe. I know how to keep us safe. I'm going to focus on the good. I'm going to focus on things I can do to be supportive of people who are suffering, right? We can say all of those things. We can ask the child, how are you feeling? What have you heard? What do you want to talk about? What are your questions? We can have all of that conversation, but deliberately exposing ourselves to more and more stress hormones when we're supposed to be in tend and befriend mode, when we're supposed to be in that relational mode of being on the same wavelength with our child, where we're attuned, right? Where we're fixing our attachment and making sure our attachment is strong. We're the safe harbor for the child in a time of stress. By making ourselves feel more and more and more stress, what ends up happening is either we go into one of our trauma responses like dissociating, and dissociating and attunement don't go very well together, or we go into a different kind of trauma response. Maybe we get irritable. Maybe we need to sleep a lot more. Maybe we need to not be present with ourselves, which means not being present with our kids. Maybe we start becoming more of a people pleaser. Maybe we start doing anything that we normally do to cope with our trauma that isn't conducive to parenting. That's not fair to our kids. That's not fair to ourselves. Now, why is this happening? Let's understand how the trauma app works. Here's a little secret that most people won't explain to you. Your trauma app has way too much confidence in you. Your trauma app honestly thinks that if it brings to your attention some terribly distressing event, you can solve that event. Sometimes we call this counterfactual thinking. So for example, if you've ever had a single discrete trauma where your choices were part of it, let's say you got into a car accident and you find your brain ruminating and ruminating about the car accident. You're replaying the morning before the car accident. You're replaying your drive up to that corner. It's almost like when you're watching a movie and you're watching a horror movie and you know that the murderous clown is hiding behind the corner and you want to scream at the heroine, don't turn left, turn right, just whatever you do, don't open that door, don't go up that flight of steps, whatever you do, don't look for your missing pet, right? And you want to yell that at the heroine. You're watching the movie of your life, and as your car approaches the corner, your trauma app is shrieking, turn left, not right, do not turn right. That's when you hit that other car, you get into that accident. Your trauma app can't tell time. It doesn't know the difference between past, present, and future. So your trauma app is honestly trying to make you invent a time machine so that you don't get into the car accident. Because yeah, you'd be a lot safer if you had never gotten into the car accident. The heroine in the horror movie is a lot safer if she doesn't look for her missing pet. She doesn't go up that flight of steps or investigate that noise from the cellar, split up from her best friend, or, open that creepy closet. She's a lot safer if she doesn't do those things. And when we watch those scenes, we want to scream at her like, don't open the closet. Whatever you do, don't go down to the basement. We can't, though. When we're watching the movie was already shot. It already played out. Our memory already happened. That car accident could have been 10 years ago. Your trauma app has all this faith in you. It really thinks if it just gets your attention enough, if it just convinces you, you can invent the time machine, and this time you can go left instead of right. This time you won't go to that party where that embarrassing thing happened. This time you won't take that job. This time you won't say that embarrassing thing that you said in front of a whole bunch of people. Your trauma app really thinks you can fix this, but you can't. So when we're post-traumatic parents, it becomes even harder because we have these two imperatives. The trauma app really thinks that we can create world peace and we can fix wars and we can stop bombings and we can stop humans from engaging in the worst that humanity has to offer if we only put our attention to it enough. So there's that side. And we feel super unsafe when we're triggered by events in the news. Then we have the other whole thing, which is, as parents, we have this giant imperative to keep the little humans alive. So the trauma app pulls permissions from the part of our brain that wants to nurture, protect, and attach to our children. And it uses those psychological resources. And it gets us scrolling the news and reading and talking endlessly about events in the news and thinking about it and imagining it because it really thinks we can fix it. And it's pulling that attention that we have of, I need to keep my kids safe. And it's using it to keep trauma alive in our brain. And that's why I say that all trauma is trauma. Because no matter what trauma we've experienced, even if the trauma we've experienced has nothing to do with a trauma we're seeing in the news that's triggering us, all trauma is trauma. Once we get into that traumatized state, where the trauma app reawakens, where our hypervigilance wakes up, where we feel unsafe, where events are too big, too fast, too loud, too scary, too overwhelming, the trauma app wakes up. Once the trauma app wakes up, it's very, very hard to manually delete its permissions in our brain so that we can go back to putting our attentions to thriving, not just surviving, right? So when we're doing that, when our trauma app is trying so hard to keep us alive, the first thing we have to do is thank it. Thank you, trauma app. You're trying to tell me that the world feels really scary right now. You're right, it does. I appreciate that warning. It is kind of you to give me that warning. And what I can do is talk to my kids in a developmentally appropriate way about things that are going on. What I can do is take care of my self-care and make sure that I've gotten rid of my cortisol, my adrenaline right before my kids come home so I can be that present, safe parent for them. What I can do is educate myself about how to talk to my kids and how to listen for what my kids might not be telling me about their fears. Those are the things I can do. Thanks for all your faith in me and thinking I can make a time machine or establish world peace. Kind of above my pay grade. I wish. Don't have that magic wand quite yet. But thank you for trying to keep me safe. And then we don't necessarily try to shut down the trauma app. We're never going to be able to delete it. What we do is we coexist with it. We let it talk, but we go on with our life. We turn our attention to valued living. We turn our attention to our children, to our family, to our own lives, to the other things we want to attend to. And eventually the trauma app figures out that, oh, she's got this. I can mute myself a bit. And it slowly goes away. And every so often, if it reawakens, we sort of know what to do now. So if you are a post-traumatic parent and you're feeling triggered by events in the news and you're worried that you're having some sort of a regression, that your therapy stopped working, that maybe there's something wrong with you all of a sudden, know that it's normal. All trauma is trauma. And if your trauma app reawakens during scary times in the world, especially if you have children that you feel the need to protect, like you're waking up in the middle of the night with them because you're nervous and you want to just check on them one more time, doesn't mean you're developing a new condition, doesn't mean that you're regressing. It simply means that your trauma app has come roaring back to life. If you like this content and you found it helpful, please subscribe, share with a friend. Let us know. You can message me. You can find us on Instagram at Dr. Kozlowitz Psychology. You can find the Post-Traumatic Parenting Podcast wherever you get your podcast. You can find the Targeted Parenting blog on Psychology Today. I'd love to hear from you about topics for future episodes. And also, if this makes sense to you, if you have any other questions about Vicarious, trauma, and parenting, please subscribe below. Thanks for listening. I appreciate the gift of your attention.